Welcome, everybody. I'm John Cezanne, and I'm a member of the Olympia Indivisible endorsement team. And I welcome you all to the sixth in our series of interviews with candidates that we're considering for endorsements. If you missed any of the previous town halls that we've had, they're available on olympiaindivisible.org. Just go there and you can click on 2020 elections and hit the drop-down menu, and you'll see town halls and all the events that have been recorded. You can see them all. Tomorrow evening, we're going to be conducting our general meeting with the entire membership over Zoom, where the endorsement team will review all the candidates running for office for positions in LD 22, CD 10, the Board of County Commissioners, the PUD, and Superior Court judges. And then immediately following the general meeting tomorrow, we'll be having our vote for endorsement, which will be coming to you online, and you look for an email from Tom Dyer. He's our Opa Vote Czar, and he'll be providing you with the Opa Vote ballot, and so you'll be able to cast your votes. Today, we're going to be hearing from Laurie Dolan and Sam Hunt, two Democrats from representing us in LD 22. Laurie Dolan is our representative from LD 2 Position 1, and Sam Hunt is our LD 22 state senator. So if you have any questions for Laurie or Sam, put them in the chat, and they'll be sent to me. So you put them in the chat, address them to Andrew Ryan, who will be handling the chat questions. But I do have several questions that have already been pre-submitted, so we'll get to those in a few minutes. But let's start, go ahead and let Laurie take over and tell us a little bit about your campaign and why you're running for re-election.
Great. Well, first of all, delightful to be with all of you today. Glad we can finally get connected. I have this other work Zoom call going over here that I've put on mute, and I'll join it when we're done here. So it's kind of a crazy time right now. In many ways, it's like the legislative session never ended, because going from when we left the session on March 12th, we were all so excited because we were able to do all sorts of things, important funding for issues like early childhood education and preschools, and raising the salaries of those teachers who work so hard with our littlest people. So we leave on March 12th thinking we've accomplished these great things that we've been waiting years to accomplish, because we've actually never climbed out of the hole we ended up in economically in 2008. We've been trying to make up lots of programs ever since that time. And then on March 13th and 14th, of course, everything fell out of the bottom of this thing with the COVID-19 pandemic, and all the great stuff that we had thought we left town getting in place is at risk because of the $4 billion hole that's about to be in the budget. So it's we're kind of involved in a whole bunch of work calls all the time, and hundreds and hundreds of emails from constituents who are trying to get their unemployment insurance. You've read all the news stories about that. And obviously it's millions and millions and millions of people trying to get through a narrow hole where there's only X number of employees that can help them. So that's all going on. At the same time, these campaigns are happening. And I'm actually pretty lucky. Sam Hunt's pretty lucky because people already know us And it's not like you're having to start at ground zero to introduce yourself to potential constituents. I'm not sure how I can only imagine how hard it is for new people who are just now for the first time putting their name on a ballot and trying to get name recognition. So I really appreciate what Olympia Indivisible is doing in terms of vetting people, giving them an opportunity to have their voices be heard so people can get to know who they are before the primary ballots are out. My campaign it's going fine. I actually sent out my first fundraising letter about a week and a half ago, and in it I put this PS joke because a lot of my friends read it and didn't think it was particularly funny, and they said put it as a PS. But in my race, we have a Republican, a Libertarian, a Socialist, and a Democrat. So you have one of every kind of political party running in the 22nd for position one. So my joke was something along the lines of a Republican, a Socialist, a Libertarian, and a Democrat all walk into a bar together. And the bartender says, "Why are you all here together?" And the Democrat says, "They all want my job." So you don't have to laugh. My husband had to laugh. My kids had to laugh. You don't have to, but it's kind of interesting that we'd have four such different characters in the same race at the same time. But you know, the thing about democracy is people run for office, and people put their names on a ballot for different reasons. Some people want to just put their name on a ballot and experience what it's like to run a campaign and get to campaign. Some people put their name on a ballot because they have some really important message they want to give to their community. When I put my name on the ballot, it was because I had just completed a 30-year career in the Spokane Public Schools, and I was, at the time, I was like 54 years old, and I ran for the state senate in Spokane, and I ran against Jim West, who was the Senate Majority Leader at the time. And Lisa Brown, that's a name you probably know, is a dear, dear friend of mine, and she had said, "We think you should run against Jim West. We think you can beat him." The truth is, we worked really, really hard, raised a lot of money, spent a lot of money, came within 1.5 to 2 percentage points of beating him, but coming that close doesn't get you the election. I mean, you either win or you don't. So one of the things I learned in Spokane, having grown up there, thinking I had all sorts of friends within Spokane, is I only had about 49% of the people who were willing to vote for me because they hadn't elected a Democrat since 1932. So fast forward, I ended up moving to Olympia in 2005 to work for Christine Gregoire as her director of policy. And since 2005 until now, Olympia is very much our home. Spokane was our home for the first few years we were here, but now Olympia is very much our home. And when Chris Rakedahl left to become superintendent of public instruction, again, I had some dear friends say, "He's leaving, we think you should run for his job." And what I realized is I wasn't done working yet. I really was once again compelled to put my, what do they say in Hamilton? His wife says, "I wrote myself back in the narrative." So that's kind of what I did 4 years ago, is I made the decision to write myself back in the narrative because there was still a lot of things that I wanted to help accomplish. One of them was to try to get a capital gains tax. We're not there yet, but there's a lot of us working on it. Another was to fix K-12 funding, because when McCleary happened, it kind of broke a couple really important pieces of K-12 funding that need to get put back into place. So I ran with some real specific reasons. And since then, there's been the police use of deadly force, which has become another really important thing to me. So those are the reasons I decided to do this. I was at the time 64 when I ran 4 years ago. I'm about to turn 68. And it's a great time of life to be doing a job like this. For one thing, unlike many of the people I serve with, I don't have a day job. I mean, this can be my job, which is great because this can be all consuming, and it would be hard to have a day job plus do this. So the other thing is, at this age, you bring a lot of experience. I have a lot of lifetime experience, and I know most of the problems that are in front of us at this moment in time are going to be replaced by new problems tomorrow. Not all of them. Police use of deadly force we're going to be working on for years, but many of them, people get very upset about the problem of the moment, and really it goes away and another problem comes. So with a lot of the stuff we touch, if you don't like what's happening in the moment, wait a few minutes and it's going to shift. And at 68, I probably know that better than I did at 25 or 35 or 45. So those are the reasons. It also got me much deeper into the Olympia community, because you get to work so closely with people, and I really enjoy people, all types. People intrigue me. I like people who think differently than other people. It's always fun to talk to them and see why they think the way they do and learn from them. And I'll stop there.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Laurie. I think you might have got a bigger laugh for your joke, but everybody's on mute.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate knowing that, because I think it's really funny.
Well, I got a laugh out of it. Anyway, let's get into some of the questions that have been submitted. The first one is, we've seen tens of thousands of protesters taken to the streets since last week in opposition to racial injustice and police brutality. What's been your personal reaction to this moment? Do you think we are at a turning point?
So I actually wrote a Facebook post about a week ago now, and I will send that to you guys so you can read it, because I spent a lot of time kind of thinking through. I had this need to put what I was thinking into words, and so I will send that to you because I'd like to have you read it if you haven't done so. I grew up in Spokane, and Spokane's a pretty white community. When I was growing up, about 10% of the population was African American, so nothing like the diversity we see in our larger cities in Washington State. But I went to schools. I went to Lewis and Clark High School, which was the most racially diverse school in the city. And then later on, teaching for the Spokane Public Schools and working in the Spokane Public Schools for 30 years, I worked with lots of the African American community. And I would meet with the Black ministers. There were about 6 big Black churches in Spokane, and I'd meet with those ministers monthly and talk about ways we could help their children be more successful in school. And what I learned early on is the best way to get a little Black boy who's misbehaving in school to behave well is to invite his mama and his minister to school. And when you're working with his mama and his minister, those are 2 people he doesn't want to disappoint at all. And it gets you a little cachet, because if you're in the room with his mama and his minister, even though you're this white woman, you must be okay anyway. And so I did a lot of that kind of work in the Spokane Public Schools. I think that racism in the United States has been with us it's been with us before we were the United States. It started here 400 years ago. There are so many ways that the deck is stacked against our brown and Black citizens that we as a society have not actually fixed. And I mean, that's a lot of what I did with K-12 education, is trying to make it equitable for all kids, trying to give all kids a chance to succeed. So I have been really aware for many years of my adult life about the institutional racism that's embedded in every part of our society. And I have a couple of very dear Black male friends. Eric Pettigrew is one of them. He is our caucus leader in the House Democratic Campaign Caucus, in our caucus. And he grew up in Los Angeles. And so he got the lecture from his parents whenever he'd leave the house about how you act if you get stopped by a police officer. How do you make sure that you stay safe and don't give that police officer any reason to harm you or think that you're talking back to him? And then as a parent, he gave that same lecture to his kids. And both Eric and Ivan Bush, who was this Black man who was in charge of equity for the Spokane Public Schools, both of them really big football player type Black men, in tears, explaining how horrid it is to send your child out wondering if your kid's going to make it back home safe. So I I feel all that. I'm a pretty empathetic person. And so when that happened last week, when we watched George Floyd get murdered in front of us for those 8 to 9 minutes, I, like everyone else, was horrified. And I do think this moment is different. And I think part of it is just the horror of watching somebody murder another person so casually in front of us, standing there, with no emotion at all, hands in his pocket as though, oh, I'm just waiting for a cup of coffee to brew. And I think that got people's attention in a way that the other tragedies along the way have not gotten the same amount of attention, because it was just so absolutely emotionless, and we all watched it for those 9 minutes. And so I think Americans who maybe haven't realized before how god-awful this is suddenly are tuned in a big way. I mean, obviously, you look at who's out protesting. It's not just Black and brown people out there protesting. It's a lot of Caucasian people, and a lot of them who I think have never thought to do anything like this before. And I think that overlay that with this president that we have right now, where people have hopefully become more and more disenchanted with him as time goes on. And I do think we have an opportunity right now to jump on this moment and make some change. I was really happy to see the bill that the House of Representatives in Congress dropped 2 days ago. It's pretty much the same stuff we had in 940, and the stuff that we are actually thinking is the next step to 940, because when we did 940, that was the beginning of what needed to change. And we kind of know the next steps we need to take. So what they did is, it's the same topics. And so hopefully we can be smart, and we can be systemic in making each change we need to make incrementally to get where we need to get. It's going to take a long time to get there, but those are some of my feelings. And like I said, I'll send you this Facebook post.
Okay. We'll look forward to seeing that. There is a call from many from many in the Black Lives Matter movement to defund police departments. What's your opinion on this?
So I don't know how many of you watch Rachel Maddow regularly, but last night she had this gentleman on, and I apologize, I didn't write down his name thinking I could remember it, and I can't. but he's Black. He has studied police forces for a long time, and he made a lot of common sense. The defunding police departments actually should not be our main talking point. What we need to be thinking about doing is taking the money we spend on social services, policing, fire departments, all those emergency things we need to make all of us safe, particularly our Black communities. We need to make sure that we keep funding those services. And he was making the point that if you talk about defunding police forces, what's probably going to happen is a lot of police forces in Black communities are going to get defunded, and nothing's going to be replaced with that money. What we really need to do is shift where we're spending the money. I mean, we need to train our police forces in a better way. But if we just go defund police forces, we're going to lose the brand new police officers who are probably better trained than the older police officers, who are more apt to say, how can we do this better? How can we be community officers? How can we work with our communities more closely in a building relationships where we trust each other? And so those will be the people you'll lose first, is the brand new people, and you'll keep the older police on force, because no union's gonna get rid of people without doing it seniority based. And his concern is, if we just say defund it, white America is gonna say, great, we can use the money on something more important to us than policing in Black communities. But what we absolutely need to do is change how policing happens. And we have put way too much into under the guise of safety, community safety, we have taken military style weapons from the military, the armed forces, and sold them to local police departments. And I remember Barack Obama, when he was president, being horrified by that, saying that is a huge mistake. We should not have weapons of war in our communities for police to use against our citizens. That's not anything that any of us signed up for. So we've made some really dumb decisions under the guise of safety. And I just would hope that as we move forward, we can be really thoughtful. And instead of saying we're going to defund police, let's say, how can we take this money that we all pay taxes into this pot of money and spend it in a way that really does make communities safe? So when you call 911, if your house is on fire, they send the fire department. If you're having a huge fight between mom and dad, you don't send the police to that. You send a mental health person who actually has the skills to step in and maybe help people resolve the situation that they're in. So we get better at sending the right helper into the right moment.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, there are many challenges to the state government due to the COVID-19 epidemic. One of them is getting our educational system working. How can we get kids back to school in a safe environment? What is the state government doing to help prepare our local school districts?
So this is kind of funny. This is the other Zoom call that I'm actually paying attention to you guys, not this Zoom call. I don't know if you can see it, but I have the background. But it's all about how do we get our kids back to school safely. That's the meeting that's going on right now with SPI. You know, there's lots of discussions happening. The truth is, it probably is not going to be a statewide approach because, as you already know, different parts of the state have been hit differently by COVID-19. In the rural area of north central Washington, they almost don't even know what it is because so few people have gotten COVID-19 there, as opposed to urban Seattle, where, you know, they didn't have enough room in the hospitals almost for a while there. So we're probably going to need some options, and it might look different in different areas of the state. I think there's going to need to be options for parents, because I think some parents are going to be a little shy about sending their kids to school if they're not sure those little kiddos aren't going to be really safe. And, you know, part of it is working with the Department of Health to figure out how do you do social distancing in a classroom. Easier to do social distancing with 15-year-olds than 5-year-olds who they can social distance for 30 seconds and then they want to tickle or hug their friend. So it's how do you get kids to school on a school bus? Usually with little kids, you might have 3 kids in a seat. Obviously, we're going to have a lot more bus runs if we're going to really bus all the kids to school and think that they're going to be safe if we still have to social distance. Until we get to a vaccine, I'm not sure any of us are going to feel totally safe no matter where we go. Right now, some things are starting to open up. I walked into Macy's yesterday to return 2 pairs of pants I bought a few weeks back online, and it felt so weird to be in a store. And I'm so cognizant of how close I am to everybody else. I'm wearing my mask, I'm wearing my gloves, I'm doing all the right things, but it's still, I think it's going to be hard for all of us to feel safe going back out more and more into the real world. And school gets kids there immediately. Chris Rakedahl, our superintendent of public instruction, he's a very dear friend of mine. I mean, I took his job. I ran for the job that he vacated when he went to SPI. And I know that he right now is taking the money he got from the federal government, the CARES Act money, and he is going to use that to buy internet connections for all the kids who live in Title I homes. So the kids who come from poorer families, he's going to have enough money stockpiled from the CARES money that he's going to keep right there with him until he sees if he needs it to buy internet connections to the homes of those kids. And I mean, that just solves a little of the problem, because not every place in the state has Comcast. So there are places in the state that actually don't even have cell towers. there's a couple dead spots in the state. So the tribes are working on trying to get towers in place for those places. A lot of the PUDs are looking at broadband extensions of lines so we can try to get broadband or Wi-Fi to the homes of people who don't have them. The other piece is we have a lot of families that don't speak English, and you can get a Chromebook in a kid's hands and you can get the Wi-Fi connection to the house, but if the parents can't understand how to use the different software that the teachers are using, and the dilemma, the way this thing started is every teacher, every school, every district kind of chose their own favorite software. And so some parents have kids that have 3 different kinds of software. They're dealing with, elementary, middle school, high school kids. And if you're a person who doesn't speak English, that can get pretty confusing pretty fast. Even if you're a person who speaks English, it can get pretty confusing pretty fast. So we've learned a lot about teaching online. Some teachers are expert at it. Some other teachers were hoping they could retire before technology ever had to be something they learned. And so they're quick trying to do, technology 101. And then you have a bunch of teachers in the middle who want to do it well, but they just don't know how. And we're doing a lot of professional development for them. So we've had a crash course on how to do that. And it's possible next fall, we're going to have a combination of things going on. So some kids might come to school on Monday, Wednesday, Friday one week, Tuesday, Thursday the next week. Other kids would be home doing online instruction, and then they'd flip-flop. I mean, I'm not exactly sure what it looks like, but we're exploring all those different options. And in some places, I think school just opened like normal because they really haven't had much of the COVID there.
Well,
that's sort of a non-answer. It's kind of exploring all sorts of the options so we can figure it out. This meeting I'm in is talking about what right now schools defined as 180 days a year, 1,027 hours a year, 24 credits to graduate. So we have real specific guidelines. And how do you move forward in a world like this and keep those guidelines in place? You can't. So what are the important guidelines? Is it the mastery of what kids know rather than how many hours their bottoms are in a seat? There's a lot of big questions right now, and school's probably some of the thorniest questions. And one more thing I'll mention is school, for some parents, more than anything, is daycare. Parents can't go to work if their kids aren't someplace safe and sound. They can't go concentrate on work. They need to know their kids are safe. And so school is daycare as well as education. So there's all that out there. Stay tuned.
Sounds like a huge challenge. This is also on education. The question is, why did you sponsor HB 2788, Assistance for Charter Schools? Do you think public funds should be given to charter schools?
Okay, I'm happy to answer that question. I'm going to start out by saying I absolutely hate Betsy DeVos. I mean, Donald Trump in my hate book is here. Betsy DeVos might even be above him in many ways, because I see her as this, I'll say witch, replace it with a B, whose whole purpose in life is to basically steal money from poor little brown and black kids to send rich white kids to private schools. I mean, that's how I see Betsy DeVos. That's how I see her version of charter schools. So put that over here and know that that's all true about me. I come from Spokane Public Schools, and in the Spokane Public Schools, we had what we called charter schools, call them alternatives, call them any name you want. And I worked in those for years. I helped start a couple of them. I oversaw our Montessori program, where we actually trained our public school teachers. We sent them away for 2 years training to become American Montessori trained teachers to teach Montessori to our kids. So that was one option for parents. We had a school that I got to help start called the Medicine Wheel Academy, which was designed for our Native American students, but it was open to any student. And we took our K-12 curriculum and we rewrote it to have a Native American flair to it. Salish was their language that they took. Their foreign language was Salish. We planned powwows with their parents and their families. So I did that for 5 years, and it was some of the most fun I've ever had. But what I came to realize is when we started schools with parents, and they're schools within a school, they're alternatives within the Spokane Public Schools under the direction of the Spokane School Board. And they had to be offered at the same amount of money as all other educational programs. They couldn't cost more. So that was part of the rules. So we had a whole process that parents could follow if they wanted an alternative within the Spokane Public Schools. So I think alternative education is delightful fun. It gets kids excited, it gets parents excited, it gets teachers excited. We would have a whole thing with the teachers union about, we'd have a process teachers could use to apply to teach in these special schools. And these were all within school buildings. So regular school buildings and maybe 4 or 6 classrooms, depending on the alternative, would be part of this program. And so that's my experience, is 30 years of working with alternatives. So alternatives don't scare me. And when the whole thing happened between our Supreme Court and legislature, where they said you must have charter schools. First of all, I would have not had them called that, because that name takes you to Betsy DeVos. It takes you to all the horrid stuff that happens under the name charter schools. But I wasn't in the legislature at the time, and the Supreme Court said you have to call them that because that's what was on the ballot. So to me, the alternative education thing is something that should be promoted. The other thing I would have said within that law, if I would have been in the legislature and could have had it my way, is that it has to be under the auspices of a locally elected school board. I mean, if you're going to be spending public money, it's got to be publicly elected officials that watch that money. So what happened is we started these charter schools, and they filled up with a lot of Black, brown, and special ed kids in Washington state, and white kids who just didn't like their public schools. But the parents who took their kids to these schools we created think that they're public schools because it's the public, it's OSPI, it's the public that's saying, here are these schools. If you want to bring your child, you can. So parents think they're public schools. Kids don't know the difference. They just are happy to go to these schools. They like them. And we have never funded them adequately because people, frankly, were pissed off that we had to do this, and those schools don't deserve the same funding as other kids get. So for all the years up until this year, those kids have not gotten the same basic ed funding that every other kid in our K-12 system gets. And I just couldn't look myself in the mirror and be okay with that. It's not their parents' fault. It's not the kids' fault. And part of the reasons those schools aren't making it is because they have a lot less funding than your K-12 schools down the street from your house. And I couldn't abide with that as somebody who spent my life teaching little kids. It seems like we were making the kids pay for a political food fight that's been going on for a lot of years. And I'm sorry about the Betsy DeVos thing. I'm sorry they're called charter schools. I'm sorry that they're not all under school boards. Instead, some of them are under this committee. I mean, I'm sad about all that. But in the meantime, we have, a couple hundred kids going to school every day, and we're refusing to pay the same amount for their education as you did for my kids when they were growing up. And I just couldn't do that. And so I've had lots of talks with the WA. They know where I stand. The WA sent me, they support me totally. They hate that I feel that way, but they get why I feel that way. I also wrote a letter about that to different people. If you want to see that, I'd be happy to send it to you. But that's why I just couldn't abide with the fact that these little kids have gotten stuck in this crazy political thing that has nothing to do with them or their education. Thanks for asking.
Okay. Well, thanks for answering.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's kind of a two-part question. The first part would be the Washington State Legislature and Senate are both run by Democrats. Why did they not support Governor Inslee's attempt to control greenhouse gas emissions in Washington state? And why do they not support Inslee in his efforts to control climate change in Washington state? And then there was another question that I thought was closely related to this that kind of impinges that. Discuss the issues associated with HB 1110. This hasn't been, it's been stuck in committee, and it deals with greenhouse gases associated with transportation. Is this on the going to get passed sometime in the future?
So my seatmate, Beth Dolio, who hopefully is going to be our next Congresswoman, she knows more about climate change than most people. She was the first executive director of the Washington Climate. It's not, for some reason, it's out of my head right now. Washington is WCV. I just filled out their survey too. Anyway, she was their first executive director. So she has been instrumental in passing some really great climate bills and bills to get toxins out of our air and our water and all of that. The gold standard that we haven't gotten to yet is the greenhouse gases. Not a lack of trying from the House of Representatives, a lack of willingness to vote for it from the Senate. So we either need to change a few people's minds in the Democratic Senate, or frankly, we need to say, sorry, we can't support you anymore. We're going to find a different candidate, because if we want that climate change bill, we have to change the Senate enough to pass it. I think it was heartbreaking for Beth to know she was probably going to run for Denny Heck's job and have to leave before she got this passed. We actually thought we could get it done this year, but it didn't happen. Joe Fitzgibbons is a hero for all of this. He keeps pushing on it. I know he's going to miss Beth a lot, but I don't see how we get there without changing the Senate. It's, you know, it's probably the most important thing we're talking about, because it's the future of our world. And people who don't get that yet aren't paying close enough attention.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. This is about ranked choice voting. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I am familiar with it.
Okay. Yeah, ranked choice voting is used in 20 jurisdictions around the country, including the state of Maine, and is on the ballot in Alaska and Massachusetts in November. We know that ranked choice voting has many benefits, including strengthening party unity. Ranked choice voting reduces the influence of outside candidates in primaries, ensures that a majority of voters support nominees and winners. Can I count on you to support ranked choice voting for Washington?
You know, I actually would support it. It took me a while to understand it. I had encouraged the lobbyists to do a ranked choice vote fun activity in the middle of the Capitol Dome, where you'd maybe use ranked choice voting to decide your favorite Thanksgiving dish. So you could have like turkey and gravy and mashed potatoes and all those different things. So something that's not candidates, not political at all, just so people can try it. I think that it's confusing if you've never thought about it. And I think the more that the people who want ranked choice voting could get out in the Capitol Mall and actually do a little demonstration and have people who are there shopping try the Thanksgiving thing, or, you know, pick whatever you want your content to be, and let people actually touch it, feel it, see how it works. I think people would understand it better than just reading about it in a policy article. So right now it needs to go from esoteric to this is how it actually works, and it's actually much simpler than you think it is. Mary Hall obviously knows a lot about this because she did it in Tacoma. So if you haven't hooked into Mary Hall on that, you should, because she's sort of an expert on it. But I would support it. I just think people aren't ready quite yet to wrap their arms around it.
Yeah, well, we're going to have our first opportunity. We're going to use it in our endorsement voting process.
I actually saw that. Yeah. So you can see. Might have been easier to start with Thanksgiving dishes, but you're probably not interviewing anybody you're not kind of interested in already. So,
well, true, yeah. So would you like to take a couple minutes just to wrap up and tell us how we can support your campaign?
So the thing I want to say to wrap up is I want to thank you because Olympia Indivisible, and I've told Carolyn Barcliffe this many times, there's a lot of politics that get played out in the local Democratic Party where people actually, they get so busy disliking each other, whether you're too progressive or too much like Hillary or Bernie or Hillary or all those things. They focus on that more than content. And content, I think, is where we do a better job of finding each other, because within the content discussions, you actually can see where you really agree, where you disagree, why do you disagree, and this is why you might want to change your mind. I mean, you get an opportunity to actually build a relationship and learn content. And Olympia Indivisible does such a great job of doing just that. And when there's important bills, like I've had a couple of bills that I've tried to pass having to do with helping people with former felony convictions get back into society. And somebody from Olympia Indivisible always shows up to testify on behalf of those bills. So the Times, 940, you were obviously actively involved in that. The times that it's really urgent to have your voices there, your intelligent voices there, you show up. And that means more than you know. I mean, it's like you're kind of like the League of Women Voters. I mean, you show up, you're smart, you're well-educated, and you participate at all the right moments. And I just thank you for that. It's really great. In terms of my campaign, I would share with you that it's always great to get donations, but at this point in my political life, I have yard signs printed up from 4 years ago. I'm not doing a mail piece. My money's going to go to the House Democratic Campaign Caucus to spend on candidates where we might actually be able to switch a legislative district from Republican to Democratic. And the more Democratic voices we have there to vote on the important topics, the more we're going to get done. That's going to be what we all want to see. So the fundraising thing, it's always great to get donations. My money's probably going to go elsewhere. I have yard signs if you want one. I'd love to give you one, and I'll send out an email. If you haven't signed up for my emails, my MailChimp emails, I'd appreciate you doing that, because it'll say things like, we have yard signs, we'll deliver them to your house, things like that. It's hard to meet with people right now. The Zoom meetings are great. If you have anybody in your life that would like a little Zoom meeting at your house, we can certainly do this kind of thing with whatever group you wanted to put together. That's always great. And that's about all I can tell you right now.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today. Enjoyed having you here.
Yeah.
And good luck to you in moving forward and in the election.
I would deeply appreciate your endorsement, and I appreciate your time today.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks so
Yeah.
much. So I think we'll take a couple minutes break now and come back with Sam Hunt. Welcome, Sam Hunt.
Thank you.
Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about why you're running for re-election and what's up with your campaign. And after that, we'll ask you if you'll take some questions.
Okay. Well, I just got to show, I wish Laurie was still here because she's got that darn husky dog on her screen all the time. So get my cougar colors here. Well, I'm just finishing my first term in the Senate. I had 16 years in the House before that. And I think we have things that we need to work on that are drastically different from when we walked out of the House and Senate chambers in March. We passed a very good progressive budget with good progressive legislation and left a $3 billion cushion in the budget for what we thought might be a little trouble from the COVID-19 response, and 2 days later, everything fell apart. and we've been trying to recover and recoup and stay home and everything. So I guess one thing that I want to do is, I think experience really counts at a time like this. And I have experience not only as a legislator, but as a congressional staffer, as a former school teacher, and as a longtime resident of the Olympia area. So I want to continue to put that work together, that experience together as we address the problems. And, I think three of the big problems that we face, I'll leave aside the Black Lives Matter for a minute, because these are things that were existing in addition to that. One, if COVID taught us nothing else, it should teach us that our healthcare system is woefully inadequate, and we need to continue to work not only for better state healthcare, but for national comprehensive healthcare for everybody. And I think that is ultimately important. Certainly, our tax system is terrible, as simply as I can put it, based on an 18th century agrarian economy. And, the lower income people pay 17% of their income in taxes. The top 3% pay virtually nothing for their share of taxes and for their share of running state government. And the third, which is something that I've worked on all my life, is education funding. We still do not have a good system for funding our public schools in this state. I voted against the education funding bill 3 years ago that the Republicans came up with and insisted that we fund education through increasing property taxes, which is one of the most inequitable taxes in existence. And so I want to continue to work on education funding. And then, there's a whole list of things, and we can get into that a little bit more when we talk about the Black Lives Matter issues and stuff. But I'm on the Ways and Means Committee, which is the Budget, Revenue, Capital Budget Committee. I chair the State Government, Tribal Affairs, and Elections Committee. And I am also on the Early Learning and K-12 Committee. So I want to continue to work in those areas and concentrate on those.
Okay. So let's start with talking about the current situation. I'll ask you this question. I also asked Laurie earlier. We've seen tens of thousands taking to the streets this week in opposition to racial injustice and police brutality. What's been your personal reaction to the moment? Do you think we are at a turning point?
I definitely think we're at a turning point. It's been way too long in coming. Just a little bit of history on myself. I grew up in Yakima. I went to WSU. And then I took a job teaching in Pasco High School in the 1960s and 1970s. In those days, Pasco was about 10% African American. I was lucky enough to get elected to the city council, and we had in Pasco 7 white folks as elected city council people. We had a vacancy, and we appointed an African American who was subsequently defeated. She carried her black neighborhood, and the white neighborhoods voted against her. So I worked with the other council, and we passed, I think, the first districting law in the state aimed at racial equity, and we passed it, and we elected the first Black city council person in the history of Pasco. And ever since, Pasco has had at least one person of color on the city council. I take great pride in that. I take great pride in fighting my high school principal when he tried to ban black gloves from black students in 1968 in the Olympics. I can go on there, but then I went to DC, and I worked in the U.S. Senate for 5 years for Senator Magnuson, and then came back to Olympia. I'd been there briefly before going to DC, I'd been here, and came back in 1980. In 95, I was elected to the North Thurston School Board and served 2 terms on the school board, and worked on issues such as ordinances or resolutions to attack bullying in the school district, and then ran for the legislature in 2016. I was not the prime sponsor, but the committee chair that pushed through the Washington Voting Rights Act to do what we've done in Pasco to allow districts across the state to, or jurisdictions across the state to come up with districts to elect people or help them elect people of color. And I supported all of the GLBTQ bills, from bullying to, to marriage equality. And I'm very proud of my support of that, and have worked with Pizza Clutch and other areas in the state, or excuse me, in Thurston County, that have worked to try to gain equality and rights for GLBTQ. I can't even say it all. People. One last story. When my kids were in high school, the basement where I sit now, right next door here, is a TV room, was the Friday and Saturday night gathering place. And we'd have 5, 10, 15 high school kids there every Friday and Saturday night, exhausting my budget through multitudinous soft drinks and pizzas. And it was a great cross section. We had several students who were gay or lesbian and who fit right in, and we didn't discourage that. We let people be people and come over and meet and have a good, safe social place. So that's just a little bit. I ramble around a little bit, but I've done a lot of work on that. I was a delegate to the 1968 Democratic Convention in Chicago. I think that was the first place I ever smelled tear gas. And I wasn't really in Grant Park, but I took personal abuse from some of the police just because I had a George McGovern button on my lapel. And one last thing, in Pasco, when I was on the city council, we had a park where the kids would gather, and there were rumors, and probably true, that there was some drug dealing and stuff there. Well, one night we had an acting police chief, and he decided to raid the park. So I always thought this would make a great movie. He rented a Mayflower moving truck, loaded the police in the back of this truck, and pulled it into the park, and down came the door, and out rushed the Keystone cops to try to quell all the kids. And it was a night of a city council meeting, and I wondered why all the police were running up and down the hallway. I found out about the time we adjourned, and I went up there and tried to act as an intermediate. But guess what? A lot of those kids out in that park, because I was teaching in those days in an alternative high school, which was a majority Black school, a lot of those kids were my students. And I talked to the police and tried to convince them to let me go across the street and talk to them and see if we couldn't calm the situation down. Well, before that happened, the tear gas flew, and I was caught in the middle of that. And we had several nights of Pasco rioting. And, so I've been through that, and I've worked on it. And I think I understand a lot about what needs to be done. I went down to City Hall one night this week just to meet with the demonstrators and to talk to them and to see what they were feeling and thinking. And I drove through town today, and it's really sad to drive down the streets of Olympia and see windows boarded up and doors boarded up and that sort of thing. That's not what we have grown to expect. There are some things that I want to do. I've got a whole list of them that I've been working on, but the legislature needs to act on that this coming year. Things like banning chokeholds, prohibiting use of tear gas and flash bangs and things like that. And I think you talked to Laurie about defunding the police. There was an article in the paper that I read this morning that talks about demilitarizing the police. And I think that is more of an accurate phrase than defund the police. The police showing up looking like teenage mutant ninja turtles, with their I looked like a football player with the pads on the outside, I guess, and just lining up and really daring people to come at them. And as we saw in many cases, they don't wait for the people, they charge. Last night I watched John Oliver's program, and the whole half hour was on police actions and police policies in the country. And It's very, very rough, very, very profane, but you know, a lot of it rings true. And he ended it with an African-American woman who was very, very upset. And she ended with what I thought was a great line, which says, "When you consider all that has happened, you should be glad we are seeking equality, not revenge." And that rang pretty true with me with what we've seen. So there's a little bit, I've got a list of it here. And of course, my other computer wants the password again. We talked about that, demilitarizing, body cameras, revising the qualified immunity laws, which I think is very important. Qualified immunity has basically given the police the right to form a circle around their own and say, leave us alone, we know what's best for us. And you know, I think citizen review of police actions, and certainly the reactions of the Tacoma police saying that their officer did nothing wrong with Manuel and Ellis rings true in our state, as well as what happened to George Floyd.
Yeah.
I could go on, but
Yeah. Well, definitely we're in a difficult time right now. Anyway, let's talk about the state budget. You support restructuring the way we raise revenues in the state, including support for income tax and corporate income tax. You say that in your questionnaire answer to us.
yes.
However, this is currently not possible due to the state's constitutional prohibition on income taxes. So what can be done, considering the current situation, to immediately ameliorate the regressive nature of our taxing system?
It's something I've been working on for more than 20 years, and keep hoping that we will get there. We had an initiative back in the 1970s to institute a corporate income tax in the state, and we got it on the ballot. And of course, the big companies went out and flooded it with money and defeated it. But we need to keep that flame alive. I'm not sure that an income tax is unconstitutional. Certainly a flat 1% tax, say on the high earners, which we tried on the ballot a few years ago. But if the legislature had the courage to pass it, you know, I would very much support that. If we could do an income tax, eliminate the B&O tax, institute a corporate profits tax, we could then also adjust the sales and property taxes downward and still have more money and have a much more equitable tax system. And we could end some of that, or at least reduce some of that equality where the bottom is supporting way too much of the services that the state provides. Make me king and I'll do it. No, that's what Trump said. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but the question is, what can we do now?
Well, I had a talk today, a guy named John Burbank, who's a longtime friend who heads the Economic Opportunity Institute in Seattle, is working on a number of progressive tax reforms, such as a tax on excessive income. Again, go after the people that make the most money and make them pay. And you know, capital gains tax. You know, I think that is something that's possible too. We face two things. One, we face long-term tax reform that an income tax and dealing with the corporate profit tax and things like that would address. And we face then the short term of what are we going to do when we come back to Olympia in January, when other people come back to Olympia and join us, of a $6 to $8 billion shortfall. Now, the first thing we need, and I don't know if we're ever going to see it with Mitch McConnell and folks, is we need some federal help. You know, we can't possibly cut $6 or $8 billion out of the state budget and provide what is dearly essential in our state, be it mental health care, be it K-12 education, you know, you name it. It would be a huge, huge deal. We hopefully learned in 2008 what doing all cuts does and the long-term negative impact it has upon the people of the state. So I'm not sure what we do in the short term. I don't want to, you know, I don't know. I hate to see the income tax go or the sales tax go up because we're already approaching 10%. So I would certainly look for other alternatives. And the other thing we're going to look at have to look at is transportation. You know, with the price of oil falling and people obviously driving less, we still have a huge impact, a huge need for transportation in our state. So I sort of feel like Sisyphus. We're going to keep pushing that rock up to the hill till we get it to roll down the other side.
I was just thinking, well, maybe we could just tell Jeff Bezos to give us $6 billion.
Yeah, what I
Cover
read
them.
the other day that his wealth through this crisis has increased something like $27 billion.
Yeah.
You know, Bezos could write a check to the state and never miss it. That's why we need to go after some of those people. We have probably more millionaires per capita in Washington than any other state, with Amazon and Microsoft and the other, and Costco and the other big companies here, Boeing. And you know, those people, fat cats ought to be paying their fair share.
Yep. So let's talk about healthcare. In your questionnaire response, you stated that Apple Health was working well, but I quote, needs more. Could you elaborate on that? What more could be done and how do we do it?
Well, boy, that's not my area of specifics on healthcare, but you look at what's happened in the pandemic, you know, nationwide, some 27 million people have fallen off of their healthcare because they lost their jobs. And the first thing we should do is, through the public option and other things, is that employment should not be the main qualifier for healthcare. And we have to find some way to fund that, be it, again, you know, we every time we come up with something, there's something we have to pay for. I have an old Peanuts cartoon on my wall in the office that I've had for years, and it's Snoopy and I can't remember what the little bird's name is.
Tweety
but
bird.
he comes up and he says, you know, what we need is umbrellas for everybody. It's pouring down rain. He says, we need umbrellas for everybody. And Snoopy looks at him and says basically yes. And then they look at each other, and then the bird walks off and says, why is it every time somebody comes up with a good idea, somebody has to say it costs money? And you know, that's what we constantly face. We did the public option, which is, I think we're the first or second state in the country to do the public option. We are ahead of a lot of other states, and I think we need to just keep working on that and work to expand, you know, what we can do with Medicare, with Medicaid, and with our state programs.
Okay. So I think I'll preface this next question with that in the Port Commission race last year, we endorsed Helen Wheatley. And so I just want to preface it before I ask you this. Says, Sam Hunt, this is the question that came in. Sam Hunt penned an Olympian newspaper editorial to support Port Olympia Commissioner Joe Downing against his opponent, Helen Wheatley. Why did you support Downing, who has allowed the port to overspend and also allowed environmental problems, including stormwater, to run into Budd Inlet? And it says oxygen levels are very low because of Weyerhaeuser allowing bark into the inlet.
Well, first of all, Joe is a longtime friend, and I have loyalty to friends. I worked with Joe when he first ran for Port Commission and supported him. And I think we made great progress. You know, Joe had never run for office. Joe wasn't involved in partisan politics and didn't understand, I think, what the need for having some loyalty to party was. And there are several of us who worked with him on that. And if you look at what he's done the last 4 years or 5 years politically, you know, he's been a good Democrat. I felt Joe was treated very unfairly by the Thurston County Democrats when they even refused to let him speak at the meeting where we considered his campaign. And I think Joe is workable. You know, I think if people will go to him and seek his help and his guidance and give him some guidance, I think that he will do the right thing. So, and I wasn't sure that, but Helen was going to be the good listener and be the person that we needed on the Port Commission. Two Democrats, I made a choice.
All right. see. In your response, another response to from our questionnaire, should Washington be a sanctuary state for undocumented immigrants? You replied, yes. This is especially true with the despot we have in the White House. Could you elaborate on this a bit? What state actions are needed to push back against the inhumane policies of the federal government?
Other than voting against Trump, which is the first one.
What?
Number one, we have some organizations and institutions, and I've worked with the immigrants' rights group in Thurston County. We've worked on some legislation there. We tried to get legislation to make sure that school districts did not allow or transfer information about their students and families to ICE and to the federal government, trying to protect privacy and protect their rights. And, we have a number of organizations. I know St. Michael's Church has been a sanctuary church for a long time. And I believe others, I think Temple Beth Hatfield has done the same. And we need to be sure that those rights are protected and that our immigrants are protected and honored and not locked in cages. And I think we just need to stand up for that.
Okay. On education, could you discuss the problems with school funding, and could you explain the regionalization factor in the way we fund education?
Oh, God. Yeah. Well, I mentioned earlier that I voted against the bill that created the funding formula. One, because of the property tax. Two, because the regionalization factor. For those of you who don't live in the education world daily, what the people did, and I think it was John Braun and the Senate Republicans who came up with this, they drew circles. So Tacoma was the center of the circle, and they drew a 25-mile circle. They went to Seattle, they drew a 25-mile circle. They went to other places. So that circle happened to come right through the edge of Olympia or of Lacey and caught the North Thurston School District. So the end of that circle gave North Thurston an additional 6% in funding. However, Tumwater and Olympia got 0 just because they're outside that circle. Now you tell me that it costs 6% more to live in North Thurston or to work in North Thurston, or that you deserve 6% more than Tumwater or Olympia. Obviously we know that's not true. So we were successful in getting 4% for Olympia, but we couldn't get anything for Tumwater. So now we have 3 districts with regionalization factors that are totally out of whack and further skew our school financing.
Yeah, what was the reason that they drew those circles?
Because Tacoma, Seattle, higher cost of living. It really generated in Seattle, where you can't teach in Seattle and have a house or a decent apartment in Seattle because you just can't afford the rent or the mortgage. So I think it was trying to do something with, it wasn't. I don't think it was trying to get more money in the salaries to hopefully allow some of the education employees to live within the districts where they worked.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, we talked about that. I guess. Let's see. So could you discuss the issues associated with the bill to reduce greenhouse gases and transportation? I think it's SB 5412, which you sponsored, and that didn't get anywhere. But
Didn't get anywhere.
What's going on with that, and what do you expect to happen in the future?
Well, I expect us to grow our majority in the Senate so that we can get that passed. We have a couple of senators who are conservative Democrats and who would not vote for that. One, because they were worried about the cost of it, and two, because they just didn't like it, I guess. And it's unfortunate. We got one of those we've got the clean fuel standards, I think, through the House, and it came over here and died. The chair of the Senate Transportation Committee is a real stickler when it comes to doing progressive legislation, especially progressive legislation that might involve some revenue other than putting concrete on the ground. And so until we can get more people or replace those people, the other senator is Mark Mullet. He's got a liberal challenger in the Democratic Party that Labor and the WA and various other groups have endorsed, and that's going to be an interesting fight. But that might be one way that we pick up another vote and could move ahead on environmental legislation. It's I share Laurie and Beth's frustration in that because we know how much is needed.
Yeah. So do you think that there are prospects of picking up some more seats for
Yes.
more
Yeah.
people? Let's hope. Okay. So what specific proposals do you support to regulate firearms and reduce gun violence?
I think I have sponsored virtually every firearms regulation safety bill that has come before the legislature and have voted for them. Background checks. And you notice, again, what we've done on most of our firearms legislation is it never has the votes to get through the legislature, so we have to do it through an initiative. And thank God in that case that we have the initiative so that we can do some of those things. But background checks, waiting periods. We passed legislation that allows people with mental health problems to have their firearms confiscated if they run askance of the law. I would certainly like to see a huge reduction in the number of firearms we have in this state. With the crazies in the Second Amendment group running around, that's going to be very difficult to do. But I'm a real advocate. I've been endorsed by the Alliance for Gun Responsibility and a contributor to that group. And I'm willing to do just about whatever it takes to reduce gun violence in the state.
Okay, so this one just came in here over the chat. And the question is, was the new I-5 Marvin Road interchange necessary? Could the 35 million have been spent for a better transportation project?
I think it's ironic. That's the second time that interchange has been rebuilt since I've been in the legislature.
Mm.
And it came about because Lacey went out and worked hard, had a good lobby team and a good team, the mayor and others who really worked for that because they viewed that interchange as being the signal for economic growth in that area of Lacey. I think we'll all get lost trying to navigate that when it opens. That's going to be another challenge. If you love roundabouts, you'll love this one. I don't know. I would have much rather seen, my priorities. My first priority for transportation, if we're going to talk about interchanges, is on 101 so that we can have better access to the hospital, because that's a real problem. I'm trying to think of the road out there. It's just the one before Evergreen Park Drive, or the road to Evergreen, but Kaiser. I'd much rather see an interchange there, because every year the people from the hospital come to us and say, we're having trouble, traffic's getting worse, we have trouble getting emergency equipment in and out of the hospital, what can we do to help? And every year I've tried to get at least a study going on that, and it's just something we need to keep working on. But again, my priority would be to have better mass transit. I introduced a bill several years ago to add Northern Thurston County, to give us the option to vote to add Northern Thurston County to Sound Transit. Well, when Sound Transit blew up and everything, we decided not to pursue that issue at the time. But certainly, having better bus traffic, and I keep waiting for the Sounder to come to DuPont so I can go there and get on the train and ride up. I rarely drive into downtown Seattle, even much rare right now. But I will go to Lakewood and take the bus, or we'll go to one of the light rail stops and park and take the light rail in, because one, it's more relaxing, and two, it's just hell fighting the traffic downtown. But if we think we're going to pave ourselves out of this traffic, it is going to happen.
Not gonna.
And it reduces greenhouse gases if we're, taking buses, especially as more buses are becoming biodiesel and green.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, well, actually, I think we're kind of coming towards the end of our time here. What would you like to tell us to wrap up?
Oh, well, I'll tell you, one of the things I've been spending a lot of time on this year is something that is more of a national issue, but a little background. I am now the chair-elect of the National Council of State Governments, which is a national organization of legislators from across the country. And I will become president of that group in January. And my platform, I feel sort of like a Swami or something here, has been voting rights. And I started talking about that, well, long ago when we did our access to democracy package here, but I'm certainly going to take that. And I've been talking with lots of states about vote by mail and how to do vote by mail. And, we have the most progressive election system in the country right now, with vote by mail, election day registration, 16, 17-year-old pre-registration, automatic voter registration, et cetera, et cetera. And, I want to I've been working to try to kill the monsters that, the bad rumors about vote by mail and fraud and all that stuff. And so that's something I've been working on. And last night I finished, I think it was a 4-page questionnaire that a friend of mine who is a legislator in Maryland wrote me, because Maryland, by executive order, did vote by mail in its primary, and it had never done it before, and it turned out to be a little bit of a disaster. So she wanted to know how we did it. And I said, the main thing was we started in the 1990s. This isn't something that we did overnight. And so I want to continue to work to increase access to voting, to make sure that happens. And one thing other on elections is we need to diversify our candidates. We need to elect more people of color. I'm supporting 2 candidates of color in Thurston County this year because they're well qualified, and I think that they will do a good job. But you look at the legislature, we have, out of our 27, I think it is, Democrats, we have 7 or 8 now that are people of color. We just lost John McCoy through health reasons, and I will miss him greatly because he's been a great spokesperson and leader for tribal issues. But you look at the Republican side, it's all white. You look in the House, there's 1 Hispanic in the Republican caucus in the House. And, it's very hard. I wonder how they get together and talk about George Floyd and stuff in their all white caucus in the Senate. I don't want to be a part of that. But I think, working for diversity and increasing people of color at the local and state level is very important.
Yeah, it's one of our top priorities at Olympia Indivisible is voter registration. So we're with you on that, and fair voting. So we're working on that, and definitely we agree with you on diversity. So, well, thank you so much for.
Thank you, and thank you for all you guys do.
Well, you're welcome.
There are better things to do for some people, I'm sure, than sit around on a rainy Tuesday afternoon and listen to candidates babble.
Well, it's been a pleasure
Okay.
listening to you babble.
All right.
So thanks so much. And let's see if there's any other chat questions. I don't see anything, so I think we'll just have to let you go.
All right.
So much.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate what you're doing for our community and for our state.
Thank you.
Okay.
All
Goodbye.
right. Bye.